Do you see it, that it's recording?
I don't know where to look.
No, the red
It is.
light's on.
Yes, it
Ah,
is.
I see it is. Yeah.
Off you go.
Okay. Good morning. Good morning. I am Sherry Smith. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the Bay Area and a member of the Berkeley, Albany, and Emeryville League. You and I and a whole bunch of people, well, at least 100 of you who signed up and then logged in, are participating in something very new for the League of Women Voters of the Bay Area. It's a conference that is held completely virtually for all comers. We're trying to assure that we have a way not only to provide information, but to hear from you. This entails no travel, no snacks, no lunch, except what you find in your own refrigerator. Just solid information, and we hope it comes across in a way that you find digestible and enjoyable. Welcome, welcome, welcome. First off, I'd like to introduce to you our Bay Area League board members. No faces, just names. I understand there's a slide that includes all of them, but I want to say their names out loud too. Ken Ahrens, Marianne Benson, Kathleen Chaw, Roma Dawson, Vita Flores, Madeline Cronenberg, Margot McClone, Alex Starr, and Leslie Stewart. And an especially loud shout out goes to all of those who have put this first dialogue meeting together. Kathleen Chaw, Roma Dawson, Madeline Cronenberg, Alex Starr, and also Linda Craig, who has served this interleague organization so long and so very well, and is a past president. 1,000 special thanks to all of them. Today's agenda will appear magically before you as a shared screen, and after each panel presentation, there will be time allotted for questions to be answered. We're assuming that you've become familiar with how Zoom works, and we're asking you to post your questions in chat and to ask your questions throughout, and you will be muted through all of the sessions. At the conclusion of the panel presentations, there'll be what we're calling League Dialogue, which offers you the chance to participate by way of the raised hand symbol. This entire community dialogue is being recorded, including the chat, and will be available on our Facebook page. We plan to continue communicating with you, and we're going to want to know what issues you would like us to address. One last thing I want to point out to you, you'll find a list of Bay Area regional agencies at the end of the agenda. One of the Bay Area League's prime functions is to observe what goes on with these agencies. Their meetings are conveniently online, and of course, especially currently, there's no reason for you to have to be there in person. Please consider joining our Observer Corps, reporting to our board what you think we need to know and what we possibly should be taking action regarding. Be our eyes and ears and help us to be the overseer of regional government that was the prime reason for our founding. And now, on with the show. Thanks for joining us, and a good Thanksgiving to you all.
So, I'm Linda Craig. I've been a longtime member of the League of Women Voters. Actually, I'm a 50-year member. One of my first activities was back in 1974 through 76, being on the Bay Area board and then coming back out of retirement from 2004 to 2016. So my task here is to give some background about the role of the League of Women Voters of the Bay Area. It is an interleague organization, which sometimes people don't understand. We have your local league, we have the national league, we have the state league. Well, back in the 1960s, late 50s, there was a great interest in the study for metropolitan area issues and how they interrelate with other governmental, particularly local governmental entities. And so during that time, the National League encouraged regional groups to do a study of metropolitan areas. And we in the Bay Area did that. And back in 1960, we did our own study of the region here in the Bay Area. You can see the map here. And what it is that at that point, we ended up deciding we wanted to become an interleague organization, which means we are a separate level of league that oversees or participates with 20 leagues in the San Francisco Bay Area. And you can see the 9 counties there. There are interleague organizations in several areas throughout the United States, including the Great Lakes area, the Washington, D.C. area. And we are a league of our own where we hold conventions, we do our own studies, we have positions that we use, but only at the regional level. And so we want to make sure that our local leagues understand our role is that we only deal in positions or activity related to multi-county activities, organizations. And so we were recognized in the Bay Area in 1960 as our own separate level of league known as an ILO. And right now we have 3,014 members and there are 20 leagues in the 9 Bay Area counties. So this is this is our role here within the league and within the Bay Area. So let's see, next slide. Here are the regional agencies in San Francisco Bay Area. This is not a comprehensive list. And when I looked at it this morning, I said, oh my God, I left out the Air Quality District. Now, I should mention that because I was the observer for the League of the Air Quality District in 1974-75. So I know it's there. And anyway, so that should be added, and it's my error not for including that. But the point is there are these overarching regional agencies, ABAG, MTC, BCDC, the Regional Water Quality, and BAAQMD, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. They are the ones that really oversee all the 9 counties, mainly on planning and regulations. ABAG and MTC are more the planning ones. BCDC, Water Quality, and Air District are more the regulatory ones. Then there are a number of newer agencies, in particular I've just mentioned, the Bay Restoration Authority, which was enacted, I think, a couple of years ago. And mainly it receives funding in order to fund projects to maintain the bay and restore the bay throughout the waterfront areas. And so the league was supporting the formation and funding of that district. So then you have a lot of sub-regional districts that may be 2 counties, 2 parts of 2 counties, or they're operational. For example, the transit agencies are all operating districts, and some of them actually have elected boards of directors. Most of the others that I just previously mentioned are formed among local elected officials. But the operating districts in particular, I'm thinking of BART and AC Transit, East Bay MUD, are directly elected operational districts. Then we have, so this is just a sampling. We have a whole list, and at the end of your program, it does have the districts that we at the Bay Area level are monitoring and keeping track of. So how does the league operate? Well, most of you who are attending our league members know that we in the league, first we do a study before we do anything. We always do a study. And so the Bay Area League initially back in 1960 had a position on regional government and planning. We also became very active in environmental issues during the early 1970s, air quality, land use, water, solid waste, CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act, and hazardous management. So and then later we had studies of housing and transportation. All of these are positions that have been updated and renewed over the years. And when some issue comes up before a body that we are interacting with, our Bay Area League board can decide how to take action before those bodies or at election time. For example, we do tend to get involved in issues that are before the voters within the region. And so next slide is how we take action. What we do is we first study the issues that our members choose to study, and then we ratify the position at a convention. We adopt the position. Then every 2 years, we look at those positions and either renew them or modify them, or drop them in some cases. I think we have at my local league, we have. Then after we have these positions, we proceed to observe the meetings of regional agencies. And nowadays, I mean, it used to be that you had to go there in person, but nowadays, I believe every regional agency has meetings on the web or Zoom or whatever. And so you actually can observe without being there in person, although I found at the time it was very important for the league person to be there in the front row with the agenda, taking good notes and keeping them accountable just by our very presence. But in any event, you can observe meetings of regional agencies without necessarily having to drive and go to meetings. So we also have on our LWVBA board of directors, specific program directors on these issues: regional governance, housing, transportation, natural resources. Another thing we do is when we want to support positions or policies of these regional agencies, frequently we do partner with other regional advocacy organizations, such as Greenbelt Alliance or SPUR, Transform, Bay Area Council, Nonprofit Housing of Northern California. Now, that's not exclusive. There are others that we also participate in, but it works sometimes better to be part of a group effort in a particular direction in order to be successful. So when we do take action, however, it is whatever we decide to do is approved by the board, the league board, the Bay Area League Board, and any statement we make is approved by the president and under the name of the president. So it's not just anybody can do that. There's a process. And then finally, what we like to remind our local leagues is that throughout the league, state, national, and also here in the Bay Area, we have a principle in league that we all speak with one voice. So if, for example, the Bay Area League decides to do something before a regional agency, we understand, or the local league should understand, that they should either be silent or agree with what we're doing or make input before we make the decision. But we insist that when the league speaks, we speak with one voice. So next, we got, okay. So then what we do, how to keep the local leagues involved. We have at the Bay Area level an interleague network north and an interleague network south. How it sort of works is the south area coordinates with the Santa Clara County Council and with the two leagues in San Mateo County. And that's less formal, but I have on occasion when I was president attended the Santa Clara County Interleague Network, and I know Roma attends as well because you're there in Santa Clara County. Then the north is less structured, but we have been having meetings I don't know, now the internet is the only way to do it. I don't know how often they've been held, but we do try to let the local leagues know what we are doing, and they give us reports about what they're doing. And so it's a matter of coordination. So then we have Bay Area League Day every year, somewhere around January, February, on a major topic of interest within the Bay Area with key speakers for a whole morning. And we've done this every year as long as I've been around. Then, and now we can do this on Zoom as we need to. Then we also have an annual council every other year, or a convention every 2 years, to review what's happening in the league for our members to send delegates to, and also to approve changes in the bylaws or positions, etc. Then we also have, as many of you know, the Bay Area Monitor, which is our great publication that hopefully you're all subscribing to, that comes out every 2 months. And we now supplement that with Bay Area Monitor Notes that comes out, I think, weekly or maybe bi-weekly. Anyway, that keeps us up to date on issues. And then finally, we have our website, we have our Facebook page, and other things that keep you informed about what is happening in the Bay Area and events or things that we're doing that we think you need to know about. So I think that's about it. But anyway, so that's the background of who we are and how you can become informed, how you can possibly monitor regional agencies, or at least know when we ask you to take action and support what we're deciding to do, that you understand the background. So thank you. That's it. Oh, and you want me to introduce Diz? I can do that.
Yeah.
So next person we really want to talk about is Diz Swift, who has been our main person on advocating for climate change. She spoke at a league meeting probably 4 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, talking about her concern about climate change. We had a Bay Area League Day on the topic of climate change. And at that point, she was sort of developing her programs and interests through the League of Women Voters of Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville. She then went on to help design a climate change position or policy statement for the state of California, the League of Women Voters of California. And she is in charge of the task force at the state level on climate change, as well as a key player on the League of Women Voters national efforts on this topic. So welcome, Diz.
Thank you very much, Linda. And Linda is the one who really drew me in, and I thank you for that. Okay, may I have the next slide, please? Talking about climate and region. Climate is the granddaddy of regional. It really relates to everything, and as you all know, it's global. So I'm going to just use a couple of examples of how broad it is. This is sea level rise by 2100 from NOAA, and it's assuming that all of the delta dikes and so on actually hold. And if that's not the case, it's even more severe. But as you can see here, transportation corridors are affected across all the Bay Area and beyond. Airports are affected, the major airports, all three. Harbors, sewage treatment plants, which are typically at the bottom of the hill, are prone to flooding. And housing, which is typically like East Palo Alto and West Berkeley, West Oakland, are typically the mostly low income housing, and that's threatened. And of course, the major finance centers have a threat, a lot of downtown San Francisco. So next slide, please. Another area of climate is wildfire risk, and this is no news to you. It's made worse by drought, which we are seeing more and more, which includes higher temperatures and changing weather. We can't forget our wonderful lightning storm, which lit off 2 of the enormous fires in the Bay Area. And this is a map on the right showing the actual area. This is just 2020. And look at that huge area covered by wildfire. Put on their county lines just to show you that, you know, wildfires don't pay attention to lines. They just are wildfires. So climate crosses over everything and its impacts cross over. Next slide, please. This shows California's emission goals. We hope to be by 2050 at 80% of 1990 levels, and you can see how far down that is. The current emissions are shown in colors, and you can see that we have come down since 2010. We have met our target of 2020. 2030 target is hard. You can see where we are, and that's only 10 years. A lot of it is transportation, the dark blue on the bottom, and then the 2 blue colors near the top are mostly buildings, and that's commercial and residential. So the transportation is huge in emission, and buildings and moving to all electric buildings is something, but also building construction materials is a significant part of the emissions. Next slide, please. So housing and transportation, I suspect you all know how this works. California has built out development, so-called, they're horizontal, big lawns and so forth. And as time goes on, the farther out they are, the more affordable they are. And where the work is farther and farther away. So the lower your income, the harder it is to find housing near your job. And so there's transportation in between. And as you know, buildings and transportation are a huge part of emissions. The other piece to this, of course, is the economic. It's harder and it costs more money to travel all that way. And so for the people who least afford it, often have the farthest to go. And so getting closer to the work is something that is being worked on in California. Next slide, please. So linking housing and transportation, you can see, and CEQA, which was just mentioned by, I guess, Linda. Here's some examples from the 2020 legislative sessions. We need more transportation, more mass transit, more transit that gets you to where you want to go without driving. So long distance transit. The SB 288 by Wiener, Scott Wiener of San Francisco, the league supported and it passed. And the point is that that bill gives sort of a fast track and exempts some transportation projects from CEQA. And we're always saying, oh my goodness, we can't do that. But the league has to weigh more than one position. And so we have to see which, on balance, is the most appropriate a support or neutral or opposed position. So we supported that one. We also supported the SB 50, which was streamlined approval for housing, but that didn't pass. One that was also proposed in the assembly, we did not support because it didn't have as much public participation and transparency, but it died. And then the last one, similarly, looking for CEQA exceptions for housing, died. Now, remember that 2020 was an unusual session because we had the COVID-19 crisis and a lot of bills just went by the wayside to work on the COVID crisis. Next slide, please. So as we've described, the regional aspect of climate is apparent. And now it is a US priority. It was determined to be part of program. We lobbied local leagues and state leagues prior in the run up to the convention. And we had 13 state leagues and over 90 local leagues that pointed out that climate really needs to be a part of program. And it is now a priority program element within the US League. So right after convention, we jumped out and formed the US Climate Team, which I co-chair with Eleanor Revelle of Illinois, who was the previous chair of the US Climate Change Task Force. We now, as you can see the map, darker colors mean more folks. California is darker partly because we formed the Climate Change Task Force a few years ago and have been building climate as an effort longer than some of the other states. These are the listed on the left are the extant issue teams, sort of in order of age. Carbon pricing is a national team we've been working on since 2014. Food, soils, and agriculture came out of California and is now across the US, including some really wonderful people that are associated with economics in farm policy, such as subsidies and balanced markets and so on, University of Wisconsin. Municipal climate action plans, some cities have gone way ahead and have had a climate action plan for a long time. In Berkeley, the league worked together with the city to get a climate action plan, and all across the US, there are people that are municipalities that haven't even thought about it. So we are getting now linking across leagues across the US on what are the best practices for those climate action plans. Climate justice, clearly an important element. Renewable energy, water, which we have a very strong California Water Committee that's been active for decades, literally. But now we're allying with the ILO of Lake Michigan region, which has a very strong water effort, and an ILO of the Upper Mississippi River region, which also has a strong water effort. And that is chaired by a colleague out of North Carolina. Health and climate chaired out of New York, which includes 2 members. The leading members actually have graduate degrees in health and climate. So actually the linkage and coupling of those two. Regional transportation, we're talking bigger regions than the Bay Area region, for example, although that's absolutely critical. One of them is called Transportation and Climate Initiative, which links a number of Northeastern states, much like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which links 11 Northeastern and Mid-Atlantic states in a cap and trade program. Oceans, which is sea level rise, absolutely, which affects the entire Atlantic coast, well, the Mid-Atlantic and Southern Atlantic coast, and low areas in California, Oregon, and Washington, as well as fisheries, acidification, and other things. And wildfire, which is currently mostly a California team, but we have interest from other areas, particularly Florida, where they have wetlands fires, which is an interesting dynamic. You would think that's kind of not possible. So this is where we are now. If you would like to participate at the US level, every one of you is welcome. And we hope that we will be able to provide the linkage across the US to give best practices. And the way Linda talked about the importance of speaking with one voice, absolutely true. So we have, Eleanor and I link in with Jessica Jones-Caparel in US and Maddie Schumacher, also a new member of the staff at US. And we have a board member that links to our US climate team. So we link through that. There will also be updates in the league update, both national and state. And all of our members, we have about 180 pretty enthusiastic members in this team and about 1,200 that are very interested in our outcome. So we want all of those members to speak to their local and state leagues to keep them apprised, speaking with one voice. So that's all for me. I'd like to move on to Kathleen Cha, who will talk more about the effort in climate that California has done. Kathleen?
All right, thank you. Again, I'm Kathleen Cha and board member for the Bay Area League. I am, and my portfolio is regional government, regional planning, so you know where I'm coming from. What Diz has said, it talks to how we have expanded our regional planning, our look to an intersection of transportation, land use, sustainability, and climate change. We no longer are doing this in silos, and I'm going to talk to you very briefly about how and why we are, in a sense, what's mandating our regional planning and what we call sustainable community strategies. There are two particular bills, and there are many, many more, but kind of have set the stage for why this intersection is occurring. And that first is in AB 32, and I think, AB 32, which is your Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006. And what made this particular, why this was interesting, this passage in the California marked literally a watershed in California's history. It required a sharp reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, your GHG you always hear about, and set the stage for a transition to a sustainable, low-carbon future. You saw some of the things that Diz talked about in the emissions. In this particular bill, which became law, they talked about reaching certain goals by 2020, and you can see, as this showed, they did do it. What made this interesting was this was the first program in the country to take a comprehensive long-term approach to addressing climate change. And the idea was to improve the environment and natural resources while maintaining a robust economy. I could go into great details about what they were doing, but it was for the first time began to really focus it. You notice there are a lot more on there, but at the time, the Air Resources Board was saying transportation accounted for 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, with cars and light trucks accounting for almost 3/4. There was a look in the sense of vehicle miles traveled and how that was increasing greenhouse gas emissions. And there was a lot more that they talked about. This led to what we call then SB 375, which was in 2000, came out as a statute 2008. This was Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act of 2008. And I put Steinberg, I didn't give credit to AB 32, which was at that time in the Assembly, Fran Pavley and Fabian Nunez, who was the Speaker of the Assembly. They were leading that particular thing. You always want to give credit to all of those who really helped promote these, as well as we were there, we being the League, in terms of looking at these acts. Now, what SB 375, Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act, was all about, it was an implementation plan. All right, so we had all these great goals in AB 32 and what we were doing, and this particular SB 375 was, all right, how are we going to make it happen? So it built on the existing framework of regional planning in an effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The bill was a very complex bill and identified multiple recommendations and requirements to meet this regional, and began to look at that reduction target, looking at the implications of planning and combining land use, transportation, sustainability. In this particular bill, it required that the regional planning, the transportation planning by the metropolitan planning organizations, MPOs, you've always heard, and there are 18 of them across the state, they integrate into their planning a sustainable community strategy. And why we're bringing that up is this is going to lead to our discussion of our regional plans today. The one on Plan Bay Area 2050 and RENA. And what this did, what SB 375 did, was modify the current, at that time, process for preparing two types of regional plans and type of local plans. And the idea was to coordinate housing and transportation decisions, because the idea was what we were doing had implications on how we're going to reduce and meet these climate change goals. That how we planned, where we put our housing, what we did with transportation directly impacted how we're going to reduce all of this. So just to give you very quick, the three plans were the Regional Transportation Plan, the RTP, which outlines transportation investments and for a region, including a 20-year outlook for likely growth in the region. It also informed the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, RHNA. We also, you'll hear us talk about this, as Regional Housing Needs Allocation, but just to give you an idea of all the things that are out there. And that was a required, and it's through a variety of departments, HCD, Housing and Community Development, requiring all of us across the board, the regional entity, in this case in the Bay Area, was ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments. And I'll give a footnote to this. And Regional Housing Needs Assessment was basically a forecast of the future household growth prepared by COGS, Council of Governments, ABAG, based on population estimates provided by the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD. We use a lot of acronyms, but it's good for you to know and understand where this is all coming from and why it's being mandated. In SB 375, and they're making all of these requirements, and for the 18 MPOs or Metropolitan Planning Organizations, they had to put a little codicil in there in the middle of the bill and addressing Bay Area's kind of interesting relationship. We're one of the few across the nation, as well as here in the state, who have separated into two organizations doing our land use transportation. Most of the COGS or MPOs have it integrated into one group, land use transportation. Here in the Bay Area, we had, for a variety of reasons, we have ABAG doing the regional planning, land use, and RHNA, and then we have MTC doing transportation. But the codicil in the SB 375 was the two needed to get together. And they were the ones that were going to, in a sense, make that plan and do it. And we could go into lots of discussions of all that's happened afterwards. But just to give you an idea, because of that bifurcation of how our purview, they had to actually put that in the bill to make sure that it would happen. Then after the plans, the local, of course, is the housing element of the general plan. Now, all of these three are going on together. And what SB, and remember that the housing plan is only one of 7 elements that a city has to do, and that governs your land use and development within the community. And it's required to be updated, demonstrating how the jurisdiction plans to accommodate its allocation of the regional housing need. So just to let you know, this is a requirement. Basically, what happened was it synchronized all this schedule for all this planning, the RTP, Regional Housing Needs Assessment updates, into what we call a 5-year planning cycle for each region. And it used what was required, a sustainable community strategy, which we call here in the Bay Area, currently Plan Bay Area 2050. And all of this was to integrate transportation, land use, housing, to plan for the achievement of mission targets for the region and serve as a common set of land use assumptions for both the RTP and the regional housing need allocation. I could go into greater detail, but I wanted to set the stage for you because you needed to understand that before now. Let us get to the heart of our regional decision making and how it affects our local communities when we talk about Plan Bay Area 2050 and we talk about RHNA, our Regional Housing Needs Assessment, Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So we will move on to that piece. And, well, before we do that, I think there have been some questions being raised about just this whole proceeding. Alex, are there any questions that we need to address? I noticed that there have been answers in the chat to some of the questions raised. Alex, any ones you want to make sure that are raised? I'm not hearing from you.
No.
Okay. Well, I'm looking at
There.
some.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go
Okay.
for it.
I've had some power outages. I've had 2 power outages since we started this adventure. So I'm on edge, to say the least. I think most of the questions have been answered on the chat line, which I think is great. But also, I think one of the main points that people are making is that for any of the decisions that we are making, we meaning the Bay Area League, are making, that we need to do more consultation with local leagues for their impact. I don't know if that's a question that anybody wants to address right now, but I think it's a good good advice from some of the members who are joining us for this dialogue.
Well,
go ahead.
I will pick that up, and frankly, no, it's a very, very good point, because and it is the behind the reason why we are doing these dialogues, and why we're talking about the observer groups, and why we're going to call to action is to have working groups going on, so that we can, in a sense, consult regularly and talk about what the issues are to make sure that's informed. Plus, there are other ways. So this is exactly what we are talking about. Decisions are not made in isolation, but we're trying to figure out as many ways as possible to get input from the local leagues, hear about the community concerns, and see how we can work with in terms of our regional decision making. So we will move forward, and at the end, we'll again come back to the same question. I think there are some questions about RENA and Plan Bay Area. And also, I think that the one question that's come up that maybe Diz, you might want to answer, is there, from your perspective, is there any big housing development or legislation on the horizon that we're looking at that might occur in our next session after, in January going forward?
We're watching the legislation that was part of the 2019-2020 legislature that might continue forward. So, but we always have to wait to see what's introduced. And so, yeah, we're in touch with the key players, as it were, but I don't know of any specific legislation. Gloria, can you add to that?
Sure. We think that 1170 will be coming back in bits and pieces, but we do have at the state level housing committee that is reforming, and I know we've got a number of people who are on this call, for example, who serve as analysts. So we start up a new biennial 2-year system that starts up in January, essentially. We'll be keeping an eye on legislation. We are of the opinion that housing legislation, which did not make it through, most of the bills we looked at last year did not make it through. We think a lot will be happening this upcoming session.
Okay. All right. I know that there are questions probably about RENA and I think, and transportation needs, et cetera. I think our next speakers will be able to, address those, and then you'll have an opportunity after that to, and we'll be watching the chat to look at any other questions coming to that.
Kathleen, can I say one thing? This is Alex.
Oh, sure, Alex.
There's some very interesting questions on chat, some of which are being answered by some others on the chat. I want to remind everyone that all of this is going to be recorded. we reach the end of this dialogue. We will try to answer them afterwards and get the word out to everyone who signed up for this community dialogue. So take heart. We are not ignoring you, but there is a limited amount of time.
We have the delightful dilemma of having more people than we anticipated signed up. You are great for you to come, and it tells us the extraordinary interest, and it tells us how much we need to do more of these to keep giving you the opportunity to have insight and to be able to answer your questions. All right, let me move to keep us on our time frame here.
Oops.
Let me move unless there's anything else. So you understand kind of the background of what we've been doing. So now we're going to look at the current regional plans impacting local communities that I think will be able to bring up your questions. In this panel, and it's panel 2, not panel 3, but in this we have two groups. We have, first we're going to look at the Plan Bay Area, and then we will look at RHNA. The Plan Bay Area 2050, it's a draft blueprint with a package of, and it's not 25 actually, it's 35 transformational strategies. And our presenter we're pleased to have is Dave Voughton, Assistant Director, Major Plans from MTC, Metropolitan Transportation Commission. I'll let you, Dave, take it from here and go through, and you've heard some of the questions, and you can kind of integrate some of the answers to that as we move forward in your presentation.
Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks for the overview of the regional planning landscape. I'm going to ask whoever's running the slides here to kind of move to the first slide of the presentation. Okay, one more. I think what you're pointing to there is a link in the presentation today if you want to download the strategies to learn about the 35 we're going to talk about today. But first of all, thanks everybody for the opportunity to share a bit on Plan Bay Area 2050. My team not only develops Plan Bay Area 2050, but also the regional housing need allocation, which you'll be hearing from Carlos Romero next. So you'll get a chance to hear about that a bit as well. Since I only have about 10 minutes to walk you through the latest regional plan, we're going to hit the highlights. So we're not going to get into every single detail today. But the final blueprint, which was approved in September, really gives you a sense of some of the key strategies that we see as essential for the region. That does not mean they're all implemented on the regional level. Many of them are very appropriate for the local or the county or even the state level in order to tackle our shared challenges. Next slide, please. So MTC and ABAG, as was mentioned, are two key regional agencies. Our team reports to both of these boards. I'll note that one of the impacts of what was talked about earlier is that the staffs were consolidated for MTC and ABAG, so we're now all one team. We work to engage with both of the different boards. Our work also involves close collaboration with the 9 counties, the 101 cities, over 24 transit operators, and many different nonprofits, businesses, and others to identify policy solutions for the region and to support local implementation of those. And most importantly, and part of the reason why I'm here is because planning for the region's future really involves engaging thousands of people, and it's often more difficult in this environment to engage with people face to face, right? So we've been doing a lot more virtual engagement, and we've talked to thousands just this year alone. Next slide. So Plan Bay Area 2050 is our third one of these more integrated long-range plans, and it's the biggest yet. It is, I don't even use the acronyms of RTP and SDS. I just call it our regional plan. What we're trying to do, if you're familiar with your city, you probably have a general plan. And what we're trying to do with Plan Bay Area 2050 is create more of a general plan for the Bay Area with elements on transportation, housing, economic development, and the environment. We know that there are also many other issue areas that the region needs to tackle, but we're incrementally building out this general plan for the Bay Area. And that's because, as shown with the graphic on the left here, they all connect to each other. And this idea from the 20th century where plans for transportation were just done in this silo was really problematic because the interactions with all the other topics are fundamental, and they have been and they continue to be. In order to achieve the vision that was approved by the boards, and which we got thousands of comments to craft this, that we're working to try to create a Bay Area that is more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. And those last couple words are really important because for so long, many Bay Area residents have benefited, but we haven't seen that prosperity shared and those opportunities shared across all Bay Area residents. We have significant economic and racial inequities in our region, so we need to keep those front and center as we're advancing policy solutions. Next slide. So the final blueprint, which, as I said, approved in September, we're doing analysis on it this fall, and we expect to go through the environmental process for it mostly next year, involves 11 themes for the future, under which sit 35 bold strategies. And this is an expanded set from we developed a draft over the course of 2020 that had just 25 strategies in it. Some of the key themes for transportation include maintaining and optimizing our existing system, creating healthier and safe streets, and building a next generation transit network. I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. For housing, it includes protecting and preserving affordable housing, spurring more housing production at all income levels, and creating more inclusive communities. For economic development, we're working to improve economic mobility and shift the location of jobs to have a better balance within the region. And lastly, on the environmental element of the plan, and much of this is new in Plan Bay Area 2050, we've incorporated protections from hazards like sea level rise and earthquakes, expanded access to parks and open space, and of course, strategies targeted to reduce climate emissions. So let's talk a little bit about what are included in these 35 strategies. What is this plan trying to accomplish? So next slide. So let's start with affordability, which every single year we've polled people and talked to people. It is clear this is the biggest problem the region faces. It is completely unaffordable for those, especially folks making less than the median income level. And so the strategies in the plan are scaled appropriately to start addressing this challenge. And it starts with reducing the extreme cost of living in the region by enabling over 1 million new homes near public transit stations. We have so many public transit pieces of public transit infrastructure that are surrounded by surface parking lots where there could be opportunities for a wide range of different housing types, and people could be able to walk to those stations much more easily. Second, we're working to preserve and produce much more affordable housing through actions that both through the public sector, but also in the nonprofit and private sector as well, to build more of those units, which are sorely needed in the region. And lastly, on the transportation front, we realized that the prices, both for tolls and for transit fares, have created inequities in our transit system as well. And so the strategies in the plan are focused on robust discounts for low-income residents, both for tolls and for transit fares. So we're not precluding people from being able to get around the region just due to the costs of using the different systems. Next slide. So pivoting to transportation in a little more detail, to make the Bay Area more connected, we will need a combination of infrastructure investments, but also new policies. On their own, we can't build our way out of congestion, and we can't build a transit system that will attract sufficient riders unless we pair it with policies that make the systems work better. So our first category of strategies here are really about creating that world-class public transportation system, not only maintaining the system that we have now and optimizing it more, but in the later years of this 30-year plan for the region's future, working to grow ridership by extending the system to new places. And that includes building a second Trans-Bay rail crossing that really knits together our regional rail network. Second, we're working to standardize transit fares across the region and enable more seamless mobility by coordinating schedules and coordinating fares, so it's just a simpler, easier to use system. And lastly, we know that highway projects have not reduced congestion in this region. They yield short-term relief that then just gets filled up by more cars. And so longer term, we see as a solution to this to permanently reduce traffic congestion by using pricing as a key angle for this. Pricing our freeway corridors and using those revenues to build out the transit system that many folks would like to see in the region with express buses and new rail lines that parallel them. Next slide. With regards to diversity, our region is a diverse place, but there are many places that have excluded folks for far too long. So as we try to retain our region's diversity, it starts with protecting renters from being displaced to the region's periphery and beyond with renter protections and other affordable housing strategies. But also it means tackling the racial inequities that by enabling more housing in historically exclusionary places. For far too long, some places in our region, as well as many places across the United States, have precluded lower income and folks of color from moving into those communities. And this plan works to address that by integrating more affordable housing in those communities to make them more diverse over time. And lastly, we're working to reduce income inequality with strategies ranging from a universal basic income to mortgage assistance programs to help folks buy their first home. Next slide. On environmental issues, it starts with making sure that people are healthy in our region. Far too many folks are killed on our region's roadways every year. And although COVID and the reduced traffic of this past year has caused a decline a bit in terms of traffic deaths, we expect with additional driving in 2021 that may spike yet again. And so we've included strategies to reduce speed limits on local streets, arterials, and freeways, as well as building safe, protected bikeways like the one shown in this picture that make it much, much safer for folks to use bicycles to get around their communities. Second, the plan includes protections for tens of thousands of Bay Area homes from rising sea levels. With just under $20 billion investment, which I know sounds like a lot of money, but compared to many of our transportation projects, it's a bargain. We can protect tens of thousands of homes from rising sea levels. We can also protect many regional freeways ranging from US 101, which could be underwater by 2050 from flooding. We could protect 98% of all the region's homes and 100% of all of our low-income and minority communities from sea level rise through the year 2050. And that is really critical. Lastly, the plan, in addition to all the land use and housing and transportation strategies I spoke about, is working to tackle climate change through a wide range of strategies. This includes expanding clean vehicle initiatives, helping to augment the state's action by electrifying vehicles and building more charging stations. It includes funding energy upgrades to enable carbon neutrality in existing buildings and expanding transportation demand management initiatives. And this last bullet here actually was just amended yesterday. You may have seen in the news some discussion of telecommuting, where we talked to a lot of people and they were eager to see a telecommuting strategy. The Commission actually acted yesterday to really add more flexibility to that strategy, requiring major employers to reduce auto trips, not only through more telecommuting, but also by helping to fund our transit system through subsidies for their workers. Next slide. Lastly, on the vibrancy principle in our plan, we are working to encourage more job growth in housing-rich areas through different sorts of financial incentives, as well as streamlining to make it easier for jobs to locate in places like the East Bay and North Bay. The plan also includes strategies to preserve preserve critical industrial lands and catalyze more job growth in those locations. And of course, if we want to have an inclusive economy, that means we need to ensure everyone has access to high-speed internet. And so looking at how local communities, as well as the region and state, can help fund improvements and also help subsidize connections for folks. Next slide. So these strategies are really define the 30-year vision for the future of the Bay Area and help make the region much more affordable, connected, diverse, healthy, and vibrant for all. But we also want to think about what MTC ABAG, in partnership with other organizations and other agencies, can do to implement the plan in the next 5 years. This brings us to the implementation plan, which is what we just kicked off this month, where we're going through and defining what are the priorities for the regional agencies to take in the next 5 years to actually move towards these 30-year visionary strategies. And this process will be ongoing over the next 6 months or so, with opportunities for public engagement in the winter and spring. Next slide. One of the ways that we will implement the plan is through the regional housing need allocation process, which you heard a little bit about earlier. If the funding for new infrastructure in the blueprint is the carrot, then RHNA is most certainly the stick. The state law requires the blueprint, the Plan Bay Area 2050 blueprint, and RHNA to be consistent with each other. And so the ABAG Executive Board officially integrated the blueprint into the RHNA methodology in October. And the final blueprint will make updates to the RHNA allocations that have been put out for public comment. I'll let Carlos share a bit more on the RHNA process, but this certainly is one key way that as we look over the next decade, we can actually start to see progress made towards many of the housing strategies and goals in Plan Bay Area 2050. There's a lot more information. I'll just one last thing. If folks are interested for read more about the blueprint, you can go to planbayarea.org, and there's a lot more material there. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kathleen.
No problem. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Let me introduce Carlos. For those of you who are not familiar with him, Carlos Romero is a housing development and land use consultant for nonprofit and community-based organizations. For over the past 30 years, he's been involved in almost every aspect of developing and operating community housing and economic development organizations as a founder, board member, project manager, and executive director. He is a city council member in East Palo Alto, presently serving as vice mayor. He is vice chair of the Association of Bay Area Governments Regional Planning Committee, vice chair of the ABAG's Housing Committee, and sits on the San Mateo County Transportation Authority Board. And he really has an incredible, extensive experience as a community organizer in low-income neighborhoods. And there's more. But I thought I'd give you context of where he's coming from, and he's going to give us some really good insight into our RHNA process and how it affects us locally and what we can do to be part of this process. So I'll turn it over to you, Carlos.
Thank you. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, Captain, can you hear me? Okay. So let's go to the first slide. Let me say, first of all, thank you to the League for putting this on. I mean, clearly ABAG and MTC and all the staff want to hear and get as much information out to the communities and cities to understand how people are feeling about this process, but also for folks to understand how the process works. Before I start, I do also want to say thank you to Gillian Adams, who is one of the principal planners over at ABAG MTC, for assistance with these slides, as well as her assistance over the last 11 months, preparing and working with the Housing Methodology Committee and the Regional Planning Committee and the executive body of ABAG to get us to understand RHNA as much as possible and to then come up with an appropriate methodology that actually meets the state mandated items that we have to address. So we start first with just what is RHNA. So it's a law that's basically been around since 1969 that requires us all as communities to meet our housing needs. Housing and Community Development of the State of California identifies the units across all income groups, and we'll look at those income groups in a bit, for which a region must plan in an 8-year RHNA cycle. Previously, they were 5-year cycles. They went to 8-year cycles, which people felt probably made more sense in terms of just the economic and housing cycles. ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments, collaborates with 101 local governments, both cities and counties, as well as stakeholders, to then develop a formula that assigns the housing numbers that have been provided by HCD, so that we can then distribute those around the Bay Area in an equitable way. This last point I think is important because each of our local governments must update our housing elements in general plans and zoning to show how it plans or how we, because I am certainly a council member in East Palo Alto, plan to accommodate our share of the regional need. So this is only one step in the process of actually moving forward with trying to accommodate our housing needs in the Bay Area and actually throughout the state of California. Next slide, please. Great. So RHNA has a number of statutory objectives, as I mentioned. Most of these, or I guess all of these, not most, are baked into Senate Bill 828, which was passed in 2018, that actually changed some of the ways that we look at and implement RHNA throughout the state. So the 5 objectives that we all have to incorporate into both the allocation as well as the methodology are: 1, we have to increase housing supply and the mix of housing types, tenure, affordability in all cities and counties in an equitable manner, and I underline equitable. Number 2, we have to promote infill development, socioeconomic equity, promote environmental and agricultural resources, protecting environmental and agricultural resources, and encourage efficient development patterns and achieve greenhouse gas reduction targets. And I think many of the speakers in the past have, in this discussion today, have talked about the necessity and the requirement of that. And that really is an existential challenge that we all have, is addressing climate change. Thirdly, we need to promote improved interregional jobs housing relationships, what some of you folks know as a jobs housing balance or imbalance, basically trying to balance low wage jobs with affordable housing. Fourthly, we need to balance disproportionate household income distributions. That is to say, more high income RHNA housing to lower income areas and vice versa. This actually comes out of a lot of important studies that have been happening at Berkeley, with Gustavo Sainz, as well as Raj Chetty, who was at Stanford, now is back at Harvard, looking at how it is really important, if we want to reduce kind of the equity gap in communities, we have to try to get lower income folks into higher areas of opportunity so that they indeed can achieve as well as our families living in higher opportunity areas. And lastly, and very importantly for me, this year's this new law includes something known as affirmatively furthering fair housing, which was a concept that was developed during the Obama administration, that again takes some of Raj Chetty's and the spatial distribution of housing and says, how can we improve the way locationally we can get low income folks, working class people who don't have the same opportunity because maybe they live in low income areas. How can we try to integrate those folks into areas that have greater opportunity? So affirmatively furthering fair housing is one of those concepts that is now deeply embedded in these statutory objectives. Next slide, please. So this new RHNA cycle, what's different? And I know a lot of people are saying, gee, the numbers are greater. There are more things that we have to look at when we actually come in, when it actually comes to developing a methodology and distributing the numbers. Number one, as I mentioned, there is a much greater emphasis on social equity. The affirmatively furthering fair housing is one example. There are higher total regional housing. There is a higher total regional housing need. The AB 868 actually has formulaically in it some changes to the way HCD calculated and the Department of Finance calculated the housing need. In addition, it has actually expanded HCD's, the Housing and Community Development's oversight of the Housing and Community Development of the State of California, its oversight on methodology and allocations. Now actually HCD can challenge these methodologies and the allocations of individual cities, which was not true in the past. In addition, what's also changed is there are now more factors to consider in the allocation, such as overpayment of rent, overcrowding, the greenhouse gas targets, which I think are vitally important. I think Kathleen talked about some of those really groundbreaking laws the state of California has implemented over the last 10 years. And this whole concept of jobs, housing, fit. Where are the jobs? Where does housing need to go? What is the balance that we kind of create to get that appropriate fit? And lastly, there are new requirements for identifying eligible sites for housing elements, which we'll touch on only briefly at the end, but it's very important for all of our cities to start very early in identifying the sites that we are going to have to provide in order to make our housing elements comply with state law. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the last 4 cycles, actually 3 cycles plus the new cycle, of what the total need was. As you can see, in 1999 to 2006, it was 230,000, call it 231,000. Let's flash forward to today, which is 2023 to 2031, which is the 6th cycle. The number is now 441,000 based on this new allocation methodology that has been approved by the state and that has been handed down to us. As you can see, if we go across the chart, you can see that we have actually produced a fair amount of our above moderate income housing, but certainly we have not produced as much of our very low and low income housing. And at this point, we're not producing as much of our moderate housing. And one of the ways that we're going to be able to address this, and Dave mentioned it with Planned Bay Area, is on the implementation side, in which we have to come up with policies and programs that can actually fund and subsidize those housing units, such as the Bay Area Financing Authority that we now have state legislation that's approved to move it forward, that we are trying to stand up at ABAG and at MTC. Next slide, please. So as far as what are the primary steps in this, we'll go back to this at the end, but we're basically in the first allocation period. So remember, there's an allocation period, there's a draft allocation, there is then the final allocation, and then there's the local housing element updates. Right now, we're in the process of doing the allocation methodology, which is how we actually come up with spreading out that 441,000 unit number throughout the 9-county Bay Area. We will be going into the draft allocation piece in the spring of 2021, but we are presently in that first phase. And as you can see at the end, the local housing element update phase is kind of the final phase of this process where we actually take the numbers and integrate them into our local planning documents. Next slide, please. So some of you, and the RHNA methodology development process, as I said, we spent at least 11 months working on this, a group of 39 of us that were appointed to this body. Again, it has to meet, the methodology process has to meet the 5 statutory objectives to be consistent with be consistent, excuse me, with the development patterns from Planned Bay Area 2050. And I cite the Planned Bay Area 2050 again, because as the work that Dave Vaughton is doing and his staff to kind of bring Planned Bay Area and RHNA together will affect some of the RHNA numbers. And that's why we don't have any final numbers now, because Planned Bay Area is indeed being finalized, and some of the numbers that are out there will indeed get changed. And I know, Dave, that's a huge task on his part now that we've actually gotten some of these numbers out. So ABAG formed this housing methodology committee. As I said, we met for about 11 months, and we collaboratively and sometimes loudly disagreed, and ultimately recommended a proposed methodology for allocating units throughout the Bay Area in an equitable manner. Let me say that no one in that committee was happy with the final outcome. And probably what that means is that we did a good enough job that we didn't bend to one side or the other side. I think we have folks in Napa who are complaining, as we have folks just as well who are complaining in Santa Clara. and in the county of Santa Clara and San Francisco. So basically, we knew we had to spread these numbers out in a way that all of us could share both some of the benefits of having jobs developed in housing and some of the burdens that may be brought on by housing. And we try to mitigate those burdens by planning correctly in our local cities. The committee developed and was guided by performance evaluation metrics. So those 5 conditions that I mentioned earlier that we had to meet, we were gauging those against metrics that we developed to show HCD that indeed our methodology will indeed comply with those statutory guidelines. And then as just recently on October 15th, ABAG Executive Board approved the release of the proposed methodology, and there's a 30-day comment period going on right now. I noticed that there was actually a comment in the chat room asking if folks are going to be commenting before November 27th. So again, you would be commenting on the methodology, not on the numbers. So that is the important part. We are approving the methodology. The numbers, there's a different process for the draft allocation and final allocation. Next slide, please. Try to hurry this up. So just quickly, the role of the methodology committee, I just wanted to make sure that people understood this was a large body made up of local elected officials, county, city officials from all 9 counties were represented. There were people from labor, there were people from equity groups, there were people from environmental groups, there were also people from the building trades, there were people that were representing also some of the larger business intermediaries, interest groups like the Bay Area Council, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a very diverse group, and we advised actually ABAG on the numerical formula we were going to assign for the region's housing needs. And as I said, it was a very robust discussion, and you know, the way it works, as you can see in the graph below, there's a working group, that's the methodology committee that I happen to be on. Then there's the ABAG committee, which is it's the regional planning committee that I also serve on, that looked at this information, held public meetings throughout, and then gave feedback to the board. And then of course the board gave feedback back down to the working group. So every single one of those meetings, by the way, was publicly advertised and were open to the community, and there was a time within those meetings for the community to speak. Next slide, please. So understanding the RHNA methodology, I wish this were easy, but let's see if we've distilled it correctly. So the region gets a total housing need that is determined by HCD in terms of number of units and where kind of the income tranches are for the Bay Area that we need to plan for. Then we work on this methodology, which I just mentioned, which is what is the formula of factors and weights that we use, you know, related to various topics you'll see in a second, that meet the statutory requirements and that will ultimately come up with an allocation that then gets distributed among the various income categories to both the 101 cities as well as the counties. And then the allocation, as I mentioned, is a result of applying that methodology to that regional, total regional housing need. And again, each jurisdiction receives a total number of units by income. Next slide, please. So the proposed RHNA methodology for ABAG that was presented to ABAG's executive board is that we will use a baseline allocation of the 2050 projected households. This was a large compromise. Some folks wanted to use 2019 households. Other people just wanted to use growth for 2050. We came up with a compromise that includes both 2019 households and housing growth. So that is the baseline that will determine how the numbers are potentially spread to the various cities. And then we had to come up with factors that would distribute low income, very low, moderate, and above moderate within those areas. And so we have a high opportunity area emphasis with a job proximity. So very quickly, under very low and low income housing units, the factors that were used were 70% access to high opportunity areas, that is areas that actually have, and there are maps that the state has developed with HCD has developed with, I believe, the state low-income housing tax credit program to show where areas of high opportunity exist. And then in addition to that, there was a 15% weighting on jobs proximity by auto, which is basically jobs that are proximate to the area by within 30 minutes of a drive. And then 15% is job proximity by transit. That's for so those are the factors for the very low income distribution. And then the moderate and above moderate, it's 40% access to high opportunity areas and 60% job proximity by auto. So those are the factors that we're using to distribute those within the various cities. So next slide, please. So I'm not really going to go over this slide because I think that Dave did a good job talking about how the final blueprint influences RHNA. And there's a state consistency requirement. That is why our RHNA numbers have not come out officially, because we need to comply with that consistency between the final blueprint and RHNA. And that should be occurring, I believe, sometime in December. So next slide, please. Okay, so.
Forgive me for interrupting you, Carlos. I'm just looking at the time, and we do want to allow a lot of time for what we call raised hands. Can you, and I do want to tell everyone,
yeah,
we'll make sure this particular, this PowerPoint is available, but I kind of wanted you, why don't you jump to the end or conclude with what you really want everyone to understand and know.
Let's go through these three slides really quickly. First slide,
Okay.
441,000. That's the distribution that we have to do throughout the county. Let's go to the next slide. So this is maybe a little easier to look at. Okay, this is a spatial distribution, and you may want to look at this. What you're looking at is the 9-county Bay Area split up into those little hexagons. And if you were to increase those, you could actually see what percentage of housing is going to what cities. Each of those little hexagons represents a city. Again, they're all separated and they're by counties. If you look at the other slide, the blue slide, that actually shows the potential numbers that would get allocated to those cities. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then if you wanted to see a chart by county, here is how you can see the allocation for 2023 to 2031, which is cycle 6, compared to the allocation of cycle 5, which was 2015 to 2023. And you can actually see some of the differences. So I think this is comparative, and it will be helpful for you if you have a chance to look at this to understand how this cycle is different and how we try to make counties receive as close to possible their share, their fair share. I think this may be my last slide. Next slide, please. What's important here is that, as I said, November 27th, that is the date where the comment period ends for the methodology. The RPC will recommend the draft methodology to the Regional Planning Committee, to the Executive Board, and then the Executive Board approves the draft allocation methodology. Again, it's the allocation methodology. And if there are any sub-region shares, those sub-regions will also get their methodology. Lastly, I think this is the last slide, I believe. Can we go to the next slide? As I said, we are here at the allocation methodology. Draft allocations will come out in spring once Dave and his team have developed his piece and the methodology is approved. And then there will be time for the public to comment and time for the public to, I guess you would say, maybe appeal. And then there will be a final allocation at the end of 2021. I will not get into the appeal process today, but there is an appeal process. It is statutory, and HCD, excuse me, I should say ABAG will be coming up with that process and letting jurisdictions know how to do that. So that is my final presentation. Sorry for going over, Kathleen, and let's move forward.
No, thank you. And I have been monitoring chat too, and I noticed that Dave has been answering a lot of questions about it. So this, and we probably are going to go over our time to give at least some time for your raised hand. So if you, at this point, if you want to make a comment yourself directly, please do it. And we have the unbelievable issue of so many of us, approximately 81 that are here and 128 signed up. So we do want to hear from you as much as we can. So if you're going to do the raise hand, which means you want to make a 1-minute comment, and it could also be a question. And I will kind of look at it and make sure that the questions in the chat that have been posed have been answered as well. So Alex, would you look and see at our, and you can do your raised hand. Remember, go to your, at the bottom where it says participants, go in there and it shows you where you can raise your hand. So do we have any raised hands at this point?
Not yet. First, can I say two quick things? One, thank you,
Sure.
to both of our speakers. I have learned more in this last hour than I have in the past 20 years about how it works. It was explained so clearly about what has been happening, and thank you both. It's just been wonderful. Please use the chat again if you wish, because again, that will be preserved along with this, and we can distribute it to all of the leagues in the Bay Area. I encourage you to put it on your website so all of your members can see it. And I know we'll put it on our website too as soon as we can. I still don't see any, I'm scrolling down here and I don't see any hands, but there's some wonderful questions that were asked in chat and answered by our guest speakers. That helps a lot.
Yeah, Dave, thanks a lot for answering those questions. It's really helpful.
Yeah, it really is. And I think now we'd have one hand raised. Dorothy Walker has a question. So I guess she has to unmute herself before she asks it, if she knows how to do that.
Madeline, you need to unmute her.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Am I all right?
Yes,
Thank
you
you.
are.
Great. Well, thank you. This is a wonderful presentation, but we all have to begin to think about one of the reasons why we're having so much difficulties achieving these goals, and that is local control of land use. And everything that we're doing is to try to find ways to modify and encroach upon and preempt a local control in order to achieve the things we have to do for equity and for climate change. So I'm hoping that the League, with your wonderful work, and I think all of the issues here are being outlined very well, but we will never achieve them, and we'll get the kind of dense urban places in every place that's already urbanized that has a total work living balance. We will never get that with the local control that we still have.
Thank you,
Okay.
Dorothy. Gloria, you have a comment to make? And you need to unmute.
I'm really sort of
There we go.
speaking, as some of you know, I serve on the state board, but I'm really speaking to my local league and our local interest. And we have been a real focus on preserving Coyote Valley. And I understand that the city of San Jose has been negotiating with the staff regarding the allocation and how the allocation is being made, particularly in the unincorporated lands area for Santa Clara County. So has the staff addressed those concerns and interest and recognize that the current general plan for San Jose, 1 is being updated and 2 is calling for preservation of open space of Coyote Valley. So I'm just curious to know the status of that.
Thanks for your question. So let me take it in a couple parts here real fast. So first of all, Plan Bay Area 2050, which kind of drives both the planning, long-range plan and the RHNA process, focuses almost all the growth within existing urban growth boundaries. So we really are trying to focus growth in places. I think one of the misperceptions on the unincorporated county issue is everybody, when they think about unincorporated county, you often think about the rural parts of the county. But almost every county has chunks of urbanized land within the unincorporated area. So for example, in Santa Clara County, Stanford University is located on unincorporated lands. It has housing needs too. And so one of the things that's kind of come up through this process is reminding people that unincorporated areas should get some amount of housing allocation. I think the concern is that some of the unincorporated areas feel like there's just too much. So it's just, we have been talking to the staff in San Jose and in Santa Clara County and are working to see if there's anything that we can do. But I think at the end of the day, you know, there is going to be a higher RHNA for unincorporated areas. And it is up to the jurisdiction to put it in those urbanized areas within the unincorporated. There are also areas known as urban islands in a lot of places in the Bay Area. And a good example of this would be Coyote Valley, or sorry, not Coyote Valley, Castro Valley, or some of the little areas within San Jose where these pockets, right, of there are houses there. People live there. They look like anywhere else down in the South Bay. Those are great places as the county does its housing element to focus that growth. And so we have a role to play, but so does the county as well.
Good point. Thank you. Virginia.
Well, mine's more of a question that it's more of a comment than a question. And the comment is that you do have this, and it's kind of a follow-up to the Coyote Valley issue. And one of your statutory objectives is to protect the environment and ag resources. What I don't hear is we're all talking about use of the land, and we know that, and it's all about climate change, and yet the land is the foundation for what you're doing here in managing where we're going to put housing, and it's and yet you're making an assumption that the land is not of value. And I am suggesting that in some of the policies and when we're implementing things, there will be consideration for carbon sequestration. That's another element of alleviating the changing climate, and it would capture and store carbon in the soil. So when you're building housing, you're going to be using land, but you're going to block the ability of the land to absorb this carbon. So I'm just saying there should be some policies established of considerations for opportunities that make sure that like trees are grown around these, which trees store all this carbon. So make sure that when you plan these housing locations that we do some offset by providing opportunities to store carbon through vegetation around these projects. And it should be one of the expectations.
Thank you.
It's not something that we at this policy level you would do, but I'm just saying if there's a policy within the documents that are being provided now, that when cities do allow projects for their increase in the housing, that they are saying that they would assume that there would be some offset of trees and vegetation around those projects. And that would be a standard that we could establish.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands raised right now.
May I ask Dave and or Carlos to
Terrific questions.
address what Virginia has said, because I think
Yeah.
embedded in Planned Bay Area are some of the answers
Okay.
to that. I mean,
Well, we
Yeah,
can-
happy
Go
to
ahead.
speak to that real quick. I think a few things. First of all, I didn't get a chance to talk about all the environment strategies in as much detail as I might have wished to. And there is a goal of really integrating parks and open space and greenery and new development. I also want to point out that the areas that we envision for future growth are, most of them are not that traditional, oh, we're growing out and we're cutting down the trees and we are expanding the amount of urbanized land. Let me tell you about the types of places that we are envisioning for housing. Aging malls and office parks. Almost, for example, most cities, you probably have some structures from the 50s and 60s that are looking a little past, maybe a little bit run down at this point. They're not really very attractive for new tenants. There may be some vacancies, especially as our e-commerce has become a bigger thing. Could those be reimagined into places that have a mix of housing and jobs? That actually can create more green space, not less, as we tear up those parking lots that are just covering the land with asphalt, right? And redevelop it into a better place for people to live and shop. Other types of places, we think about, how can we reuse public lands better? We have these BART and Caltrain stations with large surface parking lots. That's a lot of impermeable surface where water is just draining off of it somewhere else. There's no trees in many of those lots. Could we rebuild those into something better, right? There are all these opportunity sites through the region to build vertically on those sites and not outward into natural lands. And that is what this plan is all about, is putting 1.4 million new homes in places like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Dave stole my thunder. This really is an issue of how do we, in a compact, efficient way, locate some of this housing in places so that there's higher density and we use much less greenfield development.
Okay. Did Roma have something to say? Because Roma has her hand up.
Yeah. Hi, I'm here. There's a question in chat about penalties for cities that do not meet their RHNA allocations. Perhaps Dave and maybe even Carlos could comment about what happens when a housing element is certified or not, and new requirements for annual review of housing elements. Thank you.
Carlos, you wanna start off with this one?
Yeah, so in the past, HCD, if you didn't have a housing element that was in compliance, they could actually stop any type of development, including if you have a garage permit, they could actually stop that building permit. But in addition to that ability, which is pretty strong authority, and very few cities have actually had that imposed on them. But in addition to that, there are now going to be fines potentially imposed if you're not making reasonable progress towards meeting those goals. So I don't want to get into all of the sticks there, but certainly there are now fines that will be imposed as the cycle moves forward and units are not being approved. So Dave, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just add to that last comment, which is, I believe it was SB 35 that was passed in the last couple of years that basically says, if you're rejecting different housing developments and you're not meeting your RHNA, well, then something known as by right approval can occur. And by right approvals are fairly common in the rest of the United States. we have a much more, there are many more hurdles to development in California, in all the different approvals. And so you could see jurisdictions that aren't doing their fair share on housing, having that approval process streamlined, especially for affordable housing developments, as a kind of a consequence in the 2020s.
Okay, thank you. Again, I don't see any more hands raised. The chat line has been hot and heavy, which is great because people are obviously engaged. I think that that does it for now the chat. There's a bunch of stuff on chat that you guys might want to take a look at. What's the next thing on the agenda? I think we could go to that.
Well, the next thing on it is to kind of wrap this up and what's our next steps and where we're going from here. First and foremost, this meeting has been recorded, and that includes all of the comments in chat. And what we're going to do is do a follow-up to all attendees. We're going to do that follow-up. We're going to send to you the link and the PowerPoint presentation that you've been seeing going. We're also going to send you the link to the recording so that you can look at that. And we are going to look at the questions and see what maybe hasn't been answered and come up with some responses, and we'll give you a summary of what that is. And this is, but our objectives to this were to basically what we wanted to do was we had a couple of outcomes we wanted out of this. We wanted to first understand, for you to understand better what our regional decision making is, our role and process. And we then wanted to inform you on the interconnections in local, regional, and statewide decisions, housing affordability, transportation, sustainability, and the impacts on you as a league, local league community. But finally, we wanted to create here pathways to local league input because we wanted to hear your insights because you know your communities and you know what things are going on. How do we link that to all this other regional decision making and also make sure that you are aware of opportunities where you can give feedback on this. You can see what Dave and Carlos mentioned. And we want to, in the end, what this is all about is to inform our regional decision making. You've heard our process, but we want to have it interconnected. And as part of this, we just don't want to leave you here. We're kind of doing a call to action. And our next steps here, besides, we would like to establish a kind of an additional town hall briefing, but maybe every couple of months. And we're thinking of making it a 1 hour and focus on individual topics. For example, what about the new laws out there? When it comes time, this might be a great time for you to understand what's happening. What about CEQA reform and affordable housing links? What about redistricting? How it's affecting us and how it's doing locally. And then obviously, we also are looking for you to give us some other topics that you want. Now, we want to keep our dialogue going. And as part of that, what our call to action is, we are establishing what we call working groups on regional planning, transportation, housing, land use, natural resources, climate change. So we're looking for you to step up and be part of that. We will not be an onerous process, but it'll be a place where we can, on a regular, if not monthly basis, do some discussion talking about what the regional concerns are about and the local about these issues. And we will make sure that definitely you can sign up and chat if you want to, and or when we send out our follow-up to all of this, we'll make sure there is a link where you can identify yourselves, or there may be other members that you want who want to be part of that work group. I think that brings us to, unless, Alex, is there anything else down there that we have not covered? Sherry, is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I think we've answered all the hands up. And if you've asked your question, your hand is still up, you can lower your hand. But I think some of the questions have been answered in chat. Chat has been very useful in this discussion. I think it's great, and some wonderful ideas are appearing. I want to encourage people not only for the working groups, because we need input from everyone all around the Bay, but also to try to see if there are people either of in your league who might be interested in observing. And of course, observing now is remote observing. You don't have to get up and fight the traffic and try to find a parking place to observe these meetings now, which is really good.
Excuse me, I haven't spoken in a while. I have a frog. I do suggest that we keep this session open for a little while longer, just to be able to have people to have the opportunity to put something into chat. If we close this immediately, there might still be some people rolling into the chat room, as it were.
Sure.
So maybe a few more minutes, even though we're not speaking or presenting any longer, just to allow for some chat inserts.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Again, though, I want to say thank you, everyone, for your taking your Saturday to talk about what somebody said, well, it's awfully wonky what you're talking about, but it's not. What can I tell you? It is what we are all concerned about in terms of the healthy, vibrant communities that we are all part of and that we're all serving, and our many positions. And you'll notice underlying the whole issue of climate change, we cannot ignore it. It is actions now, and we at the local level can make that difference. So we keep reminding everyone about that intersection, but come up with strategies and support our local governments. We were talking about local control, but part of their local control is that we have to hold our local communities accountable for, are they doing the best? And we've got to let them know what is going to make, because there's going to be lots of opportunities. And as a league, we want to make democracy work, as we say, and this is your opportunity at the community level to make a difference, to voice, and we can speak, as we say, in one voice. And this whole session has been all about hearing more from you, and we can hear the community, and we're going to provide more opportunities to keep this dialogue going so that we can, in a sense, make those regional decisions and advocate very loudly and accordingly.
Let me add two things. One, there are a couple of questions about observers. If someone wants to contact me, I have a cheat sheet for observers about how to do it and what to do, and some guidelines, because it's not hard. You sit and listen and you take some notes, basically. But and the other thing is a good question to our two presenters from Gloria. What are your ideas for league support for the plan going forward? How do you see any league involvement in the process? Either Carlos or
well, I'll start. I mean, ABAG and MTC are regional entities, and I think we need to have nonprofit advocacy organizations talking about the need for and the centrality of regional planning that still allows for local decision making, because it is the only way that really we can move the 9-county Bay Area forward in a sustainable way. And I think the work that you're doing in that direction is helpful, and continuing to emphasize our regional interconnectivity is so incredibly important.
Okay, thank you.
And I just echo what Carlos said. I'll just add that, you know, with both of these processes you heard about today, like many government processes, they get approved and they get approved again, and there's just a lot of steps and hurdles. But make your voice heard. I know you all know you are very well know how to do that. But at every one of those steps, right? It's, you know, RENA has to be approved. I think it is like 5 times by the ABAG board, and Plan Bay Area is a similar type of thing. So please stay engaged and you know, comment on each of those steps. That, you know, that you know, that's what it will take to get these things across the finish line.
Okay. And I have a quick question for both of you. Are all of your notices and what, do they go out in more than one language to communities?
Yes, we do. For when we put some of this stuff out, we do have materials in Spanish and in Chinese as well, and then we also have translation services for other languages beyond that.
Okay. Yeah, I live in a community that's very diverse, and that's why I'm asking.
Let me add something. I have the privilege, I was appointed to the ABAG MTC Regional Planning Committee, and the spot I was appointed to was community interest. And it is a place where, you know, and I sit there as the director for the League of Women Voters Bay Area. So my point is, we're there, and we've got, you know, the name and what have you, and it becomes a good place, you know, where listening to all of that, where we can bring up some of these local concerns as we're making decisions on these things moving forward. So it's one more avenue that where the, you know, as a league and as we can, in a sense, raise our voice. And as what Carlos and Dave has said, you know, be able to be engaged and do that. It's just one way, but just to let you know.
Okay. So is our chief, Madam Sherry, is she around?
Hi, I'm right here.
Do we want to do the survey after? I think we've pretty much gotten everything done. But did we tell them about the survey at the end, or the 3 questions, or whatever it is? Maybe Madeline.
No, I don't believe so. I see another hand though,
Oh, okay.
from Seda. Inamdar.
Oh, Saida?
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi. Oh,
Hi.
yeah.
I was just wondering about other regional organizations and agencies in other areas of California. I'm assuming they're also going through a similar process as we are here. And do you have any inter-regional communications? And are there opportunities to share and help each other out in some way?
That's an interesting question.
Jerry, can I answer that question? This is
Would
Roma.
you please, Roma? Thank you.
You raise a very interesting point. We've just started a very informal dialogue with the ILO for Los Angeles County. And one of the things that we've chatted very briefly about is, are there common concerns where we might want to raise as ILOs and elevate it to sort of higher level of league?
No,
So thanks for raising that.
no, Linda, I want to speak.
Yeah, go ahead.
Linda, I'm just speaking.
Yeah.
Can I get in there? Yes, they are ILOs, and we usually communicate with others, but LA is a different thing. That's LA County. There's, you know, San Diego County, they decided not to become an ILO. And so I don't know, what do you want us to do? I mean, we are the regional agency spokesperson.
Yeah, it's good.
I
Well,
would
Linda-
wonder though,
Linda?
ask Dave and Carlos, you know, they're on that end of it. How are you working with, because there's 18 NPOs and they're all required to do all of this.
No.
how are you working with them? Because I think that was part of the question too. Am I correct, Saida?
Yes, yes, Kathleen, thank you. I was going to jump in and re-ask that, but thanks for asking.
No. So,
Dave, you
Yeah.
want to take that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead with that one. So we actually do meet regularly with the other big regions in California, which are Sacramento, Los Angeles, and San Diego. So those regions, they are all going through the exact same process as we are here, although there are different challenges in each region.
yes.
I know that certainly in the Los Angeles region, there's been very robust discussion of the regional housing need allocation down there. It's made many headlines in the Los Angeles Times and even sometimes showing up here in the Bay Area. And I think it's also been a bit, interestingly, it's been a bit easier for those other regions to hit their greenhouse gas reduction targets in their plans, because they're starting from such a worse situation. They produce so much more emissions per capita, in these other regions, that reducing their emissions by 19%, it's a little bit easier for them actually, versus we are starting from a much, greener spot, which means that we have to choose more and more robust strategies, which is good for the climate, but it definitely makes it more challenging in the Bay Area to get those incremental reductions.
Thank you. I just have one last, question. So I know you're working with these larger areas, and I was just, thinking about the very northern sort of the, Butte County and areas like that, Tuolumne, which, in some ways they feel like they're almost a separate California. And I just wonder if there's been any, effort to reach out and see, communicate with them. This is just sort of a question. It's not really, maybe you can answer it if you want to. But
It's a good question, because I think believe there's some statistic that says if you pull out all of the urbanized coastal areas of the state from the state, if you had that as that was the remainder of California, it would be one of the poorest states in the country. When you look at the Central Valley combined with the rural northern part of the state, it has very, very different problems than the coastal areas like Los Angeles and the Bay Area. So while we don't engage with them directly because they're quite a ways away from the Bay Area, I know that's been a key priority for the state to try to level the playing field a bit and basically bring jobs, bring economic opportunity to those parts of the state that have been left behind basically in the the increasingly digital economy.
thank you.
Alex,
Yeah,
Eleanor Yick has asked if maybe your cheat sheet
yeah.
can be included. Is that
do
possible
that.
in this recording, or what's available?
I can email it to Madeline and maybe she could attach it. I don't,
Okay.
Sure, no problem.
okay, I can do that.
Good.
But I do want to say that we need to know, so we don't have 5 people observing the same meeting and no one observing, the other meetings. We want to try to spread the joy. And also I want to advise people to take a look at the questions that are up there, and you can use the chat format if you want to answer these questions, so that we have an idea of how we may do this lovely meeting again without commuting, without trying to find your keys, or make sure you have your cell phone in your pocket. Because I think this is, I don't know, I think this has been great. I don't know how you all feel, but I think I've learned so much and it's been so convenient. Okay. Anything else?
We have reached what we call 11:58, and we promised that this would be a meeting from 10 to noon. And I think we can definitely, we're going to do a follow-up, and we will do a summary of those questions that you saw in there, because there's some great answers to those, and we want to make sure you saw them all, especially I think Dave and Carlos have provided some great links and things like that. And in the follow-up, we will provide links for all of that. And remember that we do have a recording of this. You have been all great, and you have, in a sense, inspired so that we can move on to the next step. And in a sense, we can make our voices heard and make a difference in our communities. So on behalf of the League of Women Voters Bay Area, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dave Boughton. Thank you, Carlos Romero. Thank you, Diz Swift, who have taken time out and to come, as well as all of you and your comments. May
Oh,
I
and
say,
you invite Dave and Carlos to join the league.
Definitely.
we will be following up with you.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely read your bi-monthly monitor from cover to cover. So I'm with
Good.
you.
Great.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Goodbye. Keep
Bye.
safe
Bye-bye.
and have a good Saturday.
Great job.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again for inviting us. Bye now.
Great, great. Did you hear the last? You didn't hear that.
Yeah, I always invite speakers to join the league. It's a good move.
It's a very good move.
Do they?
Thank you, Madeline, for being our chief organizer. And
Oh,
Yeah.
my pleasure. Everything worked. That was the good news. Nobody,
it worked better than I thought it was going, except for our power going out at home for a little.
Great.
yeah, that was, all right. So the question is now, if I start, I can stop recording, but it will also, I think the chat is
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
Right? I'm going to turn off the recording.